Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in an era where people don't just live their lives. They display them, they package them, they perform them, and they chase proof that they exist through likes, comments, and attention. And in the middle of all that noise, there's a certain kind of person who quietly confuses everyone. The person who doesn't post on social media, the person who lives without broadcasting, the person who experiences life without announcing it. And the truth is, their silence triggers people because most minds have been trained to believe that visibility equals value, that if you don't show it, it's not real, and if you're not online, you must be hiding. But psychology tells us something much deeper. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is often a boundary, and boundaries are not weakness. Boundaries are self-respect. Silence is often misunderstood because the human mind hates gaps. When there is no information, the brain doesn't stay neutral. It fills the space, it creates explanations, it writes stories, and most of those stories are not based on truth. They're based on projection. That's why a person who doesn't post on social media quickly becomes a target for assumptions. They're hiding something. They're unhappy. They're arrogant. They're lonely. When the reality can be far more grounded and far more healthy. The first keynote is simple but powerful. Silence is a boundary, not emptiness, and a boundary is not a weakness. It's a form of self-respect. Privacy and secrecy are not the same thing, and confusing them destroys relationships, trust, and emotional intelligence. Secrecy is hiding because you fear consequences. Privacy is protecting because you value what you have. A person can be fully honest and still be private. They can be open-hearted and still be selective. They can be loving and still refuse to hand their inner life to an audience. In psychology, boundaries are the invisible lines that protect your identity, your peace, and your sense of self. Without boundaries, you become emotionally exposed, easily influenced, and constantly available to the opinions of people who have not earned the right to shape you. Not posting is often the outward sign of an inward decision. I will not make my life public property. That decision is not antisocial, it's intentional. It means a person is choosing control over access. They understand that access is earned, not owed. In real life, you don't give your house keys to everyone you meet. You don't invite strangers into your bedroom. You don't open your diary in a crowded market. Yet online, many people do the emotional equivalent of that every single day. They give away their joys, their plans, their relationship details, their family moments, their vulnerabilities, and then they're shocked when those moments are judged, copied, twisted, or used as entertainment. A private person learned a different rule. My life is not a public show. That rule is a boundary. A boundary is also a filter. It separates the people who genuinely care from the people who simply consume. The internet doesn't always hold community, it often holds spectators. Some spectators clap, some criticize, some compare, some envy, some imitate, and some wait for you to fail, so they can feel better about their own life. A boundary says, you don't get to watch my growth like a series. It says, you don't get to analyze my relationship like a topic. It says, you don't get to access my emotions just because you have Wi-Fi. That is not bitterness, it is discernment. This keynote becomes even more important when you understand how easily the mind becomes influenced by social pressure. When you share too much online, you begin to live with an invisible audience in your head. You start asking, how will this look? Instead of, how does this feel? You start choosing experiences for the photo, not for the meaning. You start editing your identity to match what gets approval. That is the slow erosion of authenticity. A person who doesn't post may be protecting their authenticity. They want their life to be guided by values, not by validation. They want to make decisions based on truth, not on what will impress people who don't even know them. Boundaries also protect relationships. Many people confuse love with visibility. They think commitment must be displayed. They think intimacy must be announced. But healthy intimacy is not a performance. Some people keep their relationship private because they respect it. They understand that outside eyes bring outside energy, opinions, comparison, envy, and pressure. They want love to be lived in peace, not debated in comments. They want their bond to be built through consistency, not through public proof. When someone says, I'm private, they may actually be saying, I'm protective of what matters most. Another part of this keynote is emotional safety. Some people learned boundaries after being hurt. They shared something personal and it was mocked. They celebrated something and it was minimized. They opened up and it got used against them, so they stopped handing their inner world to people who treat it carelessly. That is not weakness. It is learning. The mind learns through experience, and when experience teaches that exposure leads to pain, a healthy mind creates protection. Silence becomes a shield, not because the person is empty, but because they refuse to bleed in public. The final truth inside this is that silence can be confidence. A person who doesn't post may simply be someone who doesn't need to prove their life to feel real. They don't need permission to enjoy their day. They don't need applause to feel proud. They don't need witnesses to feel loved. They can exist without performance. And that is a rare strength in a world addicted to being seen. The second is about one of the most invisible addictions in modern life, the addiction to external validation, the quiet craving to be approved, to be noticed, to be affirmed, and social media is designed to feed that craving with perfect precision. People often think posting is just sharing, but psychologically, posting can become a transaction. I give you a piece of my life, you give me attention. When the brain gets used to that exchange, it starts depending on it, and the moment you depend on it, you lose a piece of your freedom. Validation is not evil, it's human. Every person wants to feel seen, and there is nothing wrong with receiving encouragement. But the problem begins when encouragement becomes a requirement. That's when confidence turns fragile. You stop asking, "Do I like what I'm doing?" And you start asking, "Will they like what I'm doing?" You stop choosing what feels aligned, and you start choosing what performs well. This is how an identity becomes curated, not because someone is fake, but because they are trained to chase approval. The reinforcement loop is simple but powerful. Post, wait, receive signals, feel reward, repeat. Those signals can be likes, comments, views, shares, demons, even silence can become a signal. If engagement is high, the brain receives a hit of dopamine. I'm accepted, I'm important. If engagement is low, the brain receives a social threat message. I'm ignored, I'm not enough. And the nervous system reacts as if it's real rejection. That's why some people feel anxious after posting. They keep checking their phone, they keep refreshing, they keep scanning for evidence that they matter. It becomes less about expression and more about reassurance. People who don't post much, especially the stable and intentional ones, have often stepped out of that loop. They recognize that the scoreboard was shaping their emotions, and they refuse to let numbers decide their worth. They learn to validate themselves first. They learn to feel proud without announcing it. They learn to enjoy a moment without turning it into content. They learn to let their life be real, even when it isn't witnessed. That is internal confidence. It is the ability to stand on your own approval rather than borrowing approval from strangers. Internal confidence is not loud. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It doesn't perform. It's calm. It's steady. It's private. It says, I know who I am. And that knowing comes from self-trust, from integrity, from the ability to keep promises to yourself. The strongest self-esteem is built in places where nobody claps, waking up on time, showing up when you don't feel like it, doing the work when you're tired, choosing your values when temptation is loud, telling the truth when lying is easier, improving quietly instead of proving publicly. A person who doesn't post may be in the habit of building that kind of self-esteem, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Another reason this keynote matters is that external validation makes you easy to control. If your worth depends on approval, you will start bending yourself to get it. You will soften your opinions, hide your flaws, exaggerate your wins, filter your face, adjust your personality, chase trends, and slowly drift away from your real self. You may call it being strategic, but deep down it becomes fear, fear of being judged, fear of being disliked, fear of being forgotten. The person who doesn't post much is often less controlled by those fears. They may still care what people think, but they don't build their identity around it. This is why not posting can look like emotional independence. Independence means your mood is not rented. It means you can have a good day without telling anyone. It means you can have a bad day without performing strength. It means you can be improving without announcing progress. It means you can be successful without needing to flex it. People with internal confidence often experience a different kind of peace. Their life is not constantly evaluated in public, so it doesn't constantly need to be defended, explained, or justified. There's also a deeper layer, comparison. When people post for validation, they often post to compete without admitting it. They want to look ahead, look happy, look desirable, look unbothered, look successful. But comparison is a thief. It steals joy, it steals gratitude, and it makes even a good life feel insufficient. When someone steps away from posting, they may be stepping away from the game of comparison. They are choosing to measure their progress against their past self, not against someone else's highlight reel. This is not saying posting is wrong. It's saying the psychology behind posting matters. If you post from joy, it can be healthy. If you post from creativity, it can be beautiful. But if you post from hunger, from emptiness, from the need to be reassured, then the app becomes a mirror you can't stop staring into, and you will always need one more reflection to feel whole. People who don't post much may be people who decided they would rather be whole in private than applauded in public. Social media looks innocent on the surface, a place to share, to connect, to express, but psychologically it functions like a stage, and a stage always changes the performer. The moment you step onto a stage, your brain begins managing perception. You start thinking in terms of angles, timing, reactions, and how you will be received. You don't just live the moment, you start translating the moment into a product that can be consumed. That translation quietly changes your identity because your attention shifts away from what is true and toward what is impressive. Some people sense this immediately. They can feel the pressure underneath the fun, the pressure to be interesting, to be attractive, to be successful, to be unbothered, to be ahead. They notice that posting can become less about living and more about performing a version of life that earns approval. They see how easy it is to curate a reality, to highlight the wins, hide the losses, show the smiles, conceal the fear, and then slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to measure your worth by how well your performance is received. People who don't post much often refuse this dynamic, not because they lack a life, but because they refuse to turn life into a public audition. A performance mindset is exhausting because it creates an invisible audience in your head. Even when you are not posting, you start thinking like you might, you start noticing postable moments. You start framing experiences through the lens of how they will look. That is where authenticity starts leaking. You stop asking, "Do I enjoy this?" And you start asking, "Will this get engagement?" You stop choosing what aligns with your values, and you start choosing what aligns with the crowd. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. The brain adapts to environments, and if the environment rewards performance, the brain learns to perform. People who step back from posting often want their identity to remain theirs. They don't want to become a character that is constantly edited to satisfy strangers. They understand a powerful psychological truth. The more you externalize your identity, the more fragile it becomes. When your self-image depends on presentation, criticism hits harder, comparison becomes constant, and self-esteem starts living outside your body. Refusing to perform is often a way of protecting emotional stability. It's choosing to be a person, not a brand. There is also a deeper layer, the fear of misinterpretation. Online, you are reduced to fragments, a photo, a caption, a clip, a mood. People fill in the gaps with assumptions, and the more you share, the more you give them material to misunderstand. A private person often has a strong awareness of this. They know that the internet doesn't hold nuance. It rewards extremes, it rewards quick judgments, it rewards labels. So they don't hand their complexity to a system that can't hold it properly. They keep their full story for real life, for real conversations, for people who have earned context. Refusing to perform can also reflect a strong internal compass. Many people don't realize how much social media trains the brain to chase status signals. The right lifestyle, the right body, the right relationships, the right aesthetics. When a person opts out of posting, they may be opting out of status competition. They are saying, "I will not live my life as a comparison tool." That's a different kind of confidence, a confidence that doesn't need to prove dominance, a confidence that doesn't need to be ranked. Another major piece is emotional safety. Performance invites evaluation, and evaluation invites anxiety. When you post, you open a door to feedback, not just support, but judgment, sarcasm, criticism, and sometimes cruelty. Some people simply decide, "I don't need to expose my nervous system to that." They would rather protect their peace than gamble it for attention. This is especially true for people who are sensitive, thoughtful, or introspective. They feel emotions deeply, and they don't want random opinions shaping their inner world. They understand that mental health is not only about what you think, it's also about what you allow into your mind. Refusing to perform also changes how you experience joy. When you are not thinking about posting, you are fully inside the moment. You taste the food instead of photographing it. You feel the laughter instead of recording it. You experience connection instead of documenting it. A quiet life can become a deeper life because it is less interrupted by the need to capture proof. Some people don't post because they want their memories to belong to them, not to an algorithm, not to an audience, not to a timeline that demands constant updates. This is also connected to self-respect. A person who doesn't post may be saying, "My life is not a product for consumption." They may be saying, "My growth is not entertainment." They may be saying, "My love is not content." They may be saying, "My body is not a billboard." That decision can look like invisibility to people who are addicted to attention, but psychologically, it can be the clearest sign of identity strength. The ability to exist without performance, the ability to build without applause, the ability to be real without being seen. Protecting the nervous system is one of the most intelligent, underappreciated reasons people stop posting or never start in the first place. Most people think social media is only content, but psychologically it is stimulation, and the brain and body do not experience stimulation as neutral. They experience it as energy, as threat, as reward, as pressure, as comparison, as noise. When that stimulation becomes constant, the nervous system starts living in a state of low-grade stress, even if you can't immediately name it. That's why someone can scroll for an hour and then feel strangely tired, irritable, anxious, or empty. The body has been processing hundreds of emotional cues, social signals, and status comparisons in a short period of time. The nervous system's job is not to make you popular, it is to keep you safe. It scans for danger, for rejection, for conflict, for uncertainty, for signs you are behind, for signs you are not enough. Social media floods the brain with exactly those triggers. You see a perfect life, and your mind compares. You see an argument, and your body tenses. You see a tragedy, and your heart drops. You see a motivational post, and your mind feels pressured. You see beauty standards, and your self-image gets questioned. None of that is just entertainment, it is psychological input, and input shapes emotional state. That is why not posting, and often not engaging as much, can be a form of self-regulation. Some people recognize that their mood changes after scrolling. They notice that their sleep gets worse. They notice they can't focus. They notice their mind becomes restless, scattered, and hungry for more stimulation. They notice they become reactive, impatient, and emotionally thinner. So they pull back, not because they are weak, but because they are aware. They are choosing nervous system stability over dopamine spikes. Overstimulation also destroys attention, and attention is the foundation of a strong mind. When you train your brain to consume fast content, you make it harder to tolerate slow effort. Reading becomes harder. Deep work becomes harder. Real conversations become harder. Silence becomes uncomfortable. The brain starts craving novelty like sugar, always wanting the next clip, the next story, the next update. Some people step away because they can feel that addiction starting. They realize, my focus is being stolen. And when focus is stolen, life feels chaotic. Goals feel heavier. Discipline feels impossible, because the mind is constantly fragmented. This is why people who protect their nervous system often become more productive, more stable, more grounded. They reduce inputs that trigger comparison and anxiety, and their mind becomes clearer. They start enjoying simple things again: music, walking, reading, training, building, learning. Their nervous system shifts from reactive to regulated. They become less emotionally hijacked by what strangers are doing. They stop living in a constant state of, I should be more, I should be ahead, I should look better, I should be doing what they're doing. That inner pressure is not always ambition. Sometimes it is overstimulation masquerading as motivation. Another part of nervous system protection is emotional boundaries. Social media is full of other people's emotions: outrage, sadness, envy, drama, conflict. If you are empathic, sensitive, or highly perceptive, you absorb that energy quickly. You may not even notice it, but it builds. You begin carrying feelings that aren't yours. You begin thinking thoughts that aren't yours. You begin reacting to problems that aren't in your life. Some people choose not to post because they are already reducing exposure. They want their emotional world to be shaped by real life, not by a constant stream of curated chaos. Not posting can also protect personal peace from social punishment. Posting invites evaluation, and evaluation can feel like threat, even when it's subtle. The nervous system reads judgment as danger. A negative comment, a lack of likes, being ignored, being compared, these can trigger stress responses in the body. Some people simply don't want their nervous system tied to that roller coaster. They don't want to feel nervous before posting. They don't want to overthink captions. They don't want to refresh for reactions. They don't want to be emotionally dependent on the feedback loop. So they step away, and their nervous system relaxes. There is also a powerful relationship between overstimulation and anxiety. Anxiety thrives on too much input and too little grounding. When your brain is flooded with information, your body loses the sense of safety that comes from simplicity. You start feeling scattered, and scattered minds worry. You start feeling behind, and behind minds panic. You start feeling uncertain, and uncertain minds search for control. Many people use social media to feel connected, but paradoxically, the overload can increase anxiety and loneliness. The people who reduce posting often do it to reclaim a sense of calm. They choose fewer inputs so their inner world can breathe. This is not about demonizing social media. It's about recognizing the cost. Every platform is a psychological environment, and environments shape you. Some people do not post because they are protecting their nervous system, their focus, their mood, and their peace. And that is not a small decision. It is the decision to prioritize mental clarity over noise, emotional stability over comparison, and real life over constant stimulation. Real love and real growth don't need an audience. And that idea is difficult for modern minds because the online world has trained people to treat visibility like proof. Many people have unconsciously accepted a new rule. If it's not posted, it didn't happen. If it's not shown, it's not real. If it's not public, it must be weak. But emotional maturity works in the opposite direction. The healthiest parts of life are often the most protected parts, because what is sacred becomes fragile when too many eyes touch it. That is why some people choose to keep their relationships, their progress, and their healing offline, not because they are ashamed, but because they respect what they have. When someone chooses not to post, they are often choosing depth over display. Display is about being witnessed. Depth is about being lived. Display is about presentation. Depth is about presence. Display asks, how does it look? Depth asks, how does it feel? And those are two very different lives. A person can have a life that looks perfect online and be emotionally starving in private, and a person can have a life that looks quiet online and be emotionally fulfilled in reality. The problem is that most people judge value through visibility because they're surrounded by highlight reels, and highlight reels create the illusion that what is shown is what matters most. In relationships, this becomes especially emotional. Some people demand proof of love through posting. They want public confirmation, public claiming, public validation. They think, if you care, you'll show everyone. But love is not a marketing campaign. Commitment is not content. Loyalty is not measured by captions. The real question is not whether someone posts you. The real question is whether someone protects you. Do they respect you? Do they show up consistently? Do they communicate honestly? Do they choose you when it's inconvenient? Do they take responsibility? Do they keep promises? Do they treat you with care when nobody is watching? Because a person can post you and still betray you, and a person can never post you and still be deeply devoted. Keeping love private can be an act of protection. The more you expose a relationship to outside eyes, the more you invite outside energy, opinions, comparison, jealousy, and pressure. Some people have learned that the hard way. They posted their happiness and watched people turn it into gossip. They shared their partner and watched strangers judge them. They announced milestones and felt the weight of expectations increase. So they made a new rule: we build in peace. That is not insecurity, it is boundary-based love. It says, our relationship belongs to us, not to an audience. It says, we don't need applause, we need alignment. The same principle applies to growth. Personal transformation is not always beautiful. It is messy, slow, uncertain, and often painful. In the early stages of healing or rebuilding, you don't need spectators, you need space. When you share too early, you expose unfinished parts of yourself to opinions that can confuse you, discourage you, or pressure you into performing progress instead of doing the real work. Some people keep their growth quiet because they understand that transformation is fragile in the beginning. They don't want to turn their healing into content. They don't want to announce goals before they've built habits. They don't want to post motivation when what they need is discipline. They know that silence protects momentum. There is also a psychological trap called premature reward. When you announce your plans publicly, your brain can feel a false sense of completion, because social praise gives you a hit of reward before the results exist. You get congratulations for the idea, and then your nervous system relaxes, your urgency drops, and your follow-through weakens. That's why some people stop posting their goals. They understand that the real reward should come from completion, not from announcement. They'd rather surprise people with results than entertain people with intentions. Quiet growth also builds a stronger identity. When you improve without an audience, you learn how to rely on yourself. You learn how to keep going without external hype. You learn how to stay consistent when nobody claps. That is the foundation of real self-esteem. Self-esteem is not built through attention. It is built through integrity. Doing what you said you would do, even when nobody is there to witness it. People who don't post much often develop this kind of self-esteem, the kind that is rooted in actions, not reactions. This is not saying sharing is wrong. Sharing can be beautiful, connection matters, community matters, celebrating matters. But when everything becomes public, life becomes performative, and performance creates pressure. A person who chooses not to post may be choosing freedom, freedom from comparison, freedom from judgment, freedom from the need to prove. And that freedom allows them to love more deeply, grow more honestly, and live more fully. They don't need an audience to be committed, and they don't need witnesses to be changing, because the greatest proof is not what you post, it's what you consistently become.